passionate about this topic, as I think all of you are. And I don't pretend to be an expert, but I do have a lot of opinions. And I'm always happy to stop for comments and questions and reflections. And I might even get you to do some reflections. You never know. We are in a different age for sure, and you know that. This is from Majesto Research, which is an insurance company, and one of my friends I just met from insurance. I think the insurance companies are always interesting to look at their research because they're always watching what's happening. But technologically, we have entered an acceleration, and all of us know that, right? We all know we're in a massive acceleration of automation, efficiency, effectiveness, and innovation. They say yellow's innovation. We've been innovating since we were human, but okay. We can call it whatever we want. This yellow bit, I'm still looking for another word. I'm not quite sure I like innovation, but artificial intelligence, blockchain, the Internet of Things, it's just going crazy, right? So the industrial age to the information age to the digital age, it's introduced us, I believe, to a new age. My colleague, Silvia Damiano, made this beautiful framework, and Sylvia created a company called About My Brain. And I really like this framework, so I give Sylvia full credit for it. I think it's really worth thinking about where we are today. And where we are is a very exciting time, and it's worth reflecting because it really represents an opportunity, but also a threat. So if you think about most of our companies today, we're really still stuck in the industrial age, but the industrial age is well and truly gone. The industrial age was defined by power that was defined by who had the control, and it was mostly control of assets. It was control of financial assets and plant and capital assets. So it was defined by a very systematic age. We all learned about Six Sigma systems. We all learned to do DCMs, in terms of cash flow. We all learned to do task management, project management. We learned to do very machine-focused thinking. I remember when I was working in the late 80s and the early 90s, I was doing things that were called re-engineering in my strategy days with Booz Allen and Hamilton. I was re-engineering hospitals, and I was re-engineering credit card processes. And it was all about measurement. And it was certainly about I know, not you. It was about I know. And we definitely didn't have feedback in those days. We didn't really need feedback because it was just about the expert systems. Many of our organizations are still stuck in the industrial age, and that is what is causing a lot of the stress in that. And many of our leaders are definitely still stuck in the industrial age, even though they would like to say they're not. Their psychology is definitely still stuck in the industrial age. I would actually argue about 1996. I had the honor, as Leanne suggested, I went to Stanford in 1993, and we didn't have the internet so much. We had Mosaic crawling through the web, for those of you who remember that. We didn't have email when I entered the Silicon Valley. We had this little company that I had to visit in my organizational behavior class called Cisco. I don't know why I didn't invest in those stocks. I had Warren Buffett visit my investment class and say, don't go and invest in those digital stocks. It's only you should invest in hard cap, steel cap, boot kind of companies. And the technology club was starting with the guy that had actually ended up starting eBay and the venture capitalists that founded Hotmail. And they were my classmates, and I sort of went, oh, I'll just do leadership. Anyway, it was such a phenomenal time to be in Silicon Valley because that was when the information age was starting, and it was phenomenal from 1993 to 95 to see that happening all around me, to see it being born. Because in 1995, Netscape went public. And I believe that is when the information age went nuts. And I returned to Sydney, despite my mellifluous accent. I've actually been in Sydney really since 1990. And I joined Booz. I rejoined Booz Allen and Hamilton. And it was at that time that McKinsey, Booz, Bain, and BCG went nuts with the information age. And they were the companies that really leveraged the information age the fastest in the world because they could build on knowledge. And this was the time in companies where chief knowledge officers really rose to the fore, strategy officers rose to the fore, and strategy became very important because knowledge was power, and visionaries became very important with their knowledge. And we became actually really interested in people. GE got their potential versus performance matrix out. We became very interested in performance versus potential. And we also thought courageous was kind of interesting, just as well as measurement. And we know became very, we do know. So knowledge needs to spread, not just I know, you have to know as well. So knowledge was very important. And of course, the one-way feedback with GE became all the rage. So that was a very interesting time. I really do think it was around 1996 that it was very important to me when I left and joined the Olympics in 1996, because if you think about Sydney benefited by that. It was the first English-to-English Olympics that was ever in the history of the Olympic Games. And because of Netscape, we had electronic transmission through email. And it was because of Atlanta and email that I think we were able to build so successfully the Sydney Games. And I spent hours and hours and hours and hours and days soaking up the plans that were sent to us by email from our Atlanta Games in English. That's never happened before. And most of the games from here on in, and we've definitely consulted with all the games, including London, are built on a lot of the infrastructure and planning mechanisms that we were able to build because of that information age. But I think we're in a different age now, and not a lot of organizations have really caught on to that. And this means that it's a new power, and its ideas are power. And we're seeing it in the startup companies all over that really don't play by the rules. Knowledge is a commodity. You can get knowledge anywhere. You just dial it up on Google. And it's the ideas that are power, the new ideas that have never been thought before. And the creator is the leader. The creator that knows how to create, and we were just talking about that, that knows how to think in new ways, that knows how to imagine. Sylvia called it the imagination age, and I really like that. We're really phenomenally interested in the brain, if you haven't noticed, with all this neuro-leadership stuff. I met David Rock, who coined, or is said to have coined, neuro-leadership. And I met David I think about 10 years ago when he was first starting out. And having studied neuroscience as an undergraduate, I'm phenomenally interested in that. And the brain is phenomenally interested to us in this era because we need to understand on what conditions the brain works the most effectively. Because we need to understand how we create. And we really need to create each of our leaders as athletes and put them in the best conditions so that they can create, because they are our primary Olympic athletes. And if they're not creating in the best conditions, if they're being, stressed out, under massive depression, under massive anxiety, which most of them are, I always tell people these statistics and they laugh, but they're pretty true. I've coached hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of executives. I would say a third of them are an antidepressant, which means they're actually performing pretty well. They're stabilized, but they are an antidepressant, and that means they're not making enough serotonin, but that's okay because they're stabilized. A third of them are not stabilized. They are using other means like alcohol, drugs, and I'm serious drugs, and coffee, and sugar, a lot of sugar, and other stuff. That's my worrisome third, and a third are actually pretty healthy. So that's not good statistics. So we have some issues here, and that's what we're working with. So we're really interested in the brain. Vulnerable. I put that word when we did the succession between Ralph Norris and Ian Narev, and I still stand by Ian. I think Ian is a phenomenal leader. And I asked the board if we could put vulnerable in as one of the characteristics for the CEO that we were looking for when we were doing the succession between Ralph and Ian. And they agreed, which was wonderful, because we were looking for a vulnerable leader, someone willing to make mistakes, someone willing to ask for help. And I still remember one of the first days that Ian took the job, there was a European debt crisis, and he took his jacket off, and he went down the stairs, not the lift, and he went down, and at the time, Lynn Cobley was the treasurer. She's now at Westpac. And he just came unannounced, and he said, "Lynn, tell me about this European debt crisis. Can you get a few people around? There's a whiteboard here. Can we just kind of start thinking about the European debt crisis? Let's just jam." And that was the way that he started leading. And if that had happened under Ralph, and Ralph was another amazing leader, but that's not how Ralph worked. Ralph worked here, and a little bit toward here, but mostly here. It would have taken about 6 weeks to get that, because he would have told to David Craig, his CFO. David Craig would have taken another week to get to Lynn, and Lynn would have taken another week, and so on and so on and so on. And finally, 6 weeks later, there would have been a paper on the European debt crisis. So who knows in this era? No one knows. No one knows the answer. And if you know what you're doing in your job, I'd suggest you look again. If you feel really comfortable today, I'd be worried. You probably are doing last year plus or minus 10%. That's not good enough. So if you're feeling worried, it's okay. You're in a good place. And you should be looking for every direction feedback, particularly from the people who are working for you. They know what you're doing better than anyone, and you should be getting feedback from them. So that is critical. So who's ready for this? You know, the leaders are going to look very different. This is Iacocca, who's definitely the industrial age. You know, this guy, who I think is the information age. You may think he's the imagination age. I don't think so. I think he's the information age. And I don't know what the leader is. Everybody asks me, who have I seen that looks like in the imagination age? I haven't seen them yet. I think they're going to look very different and very unassuming. Very unassuming. I think they could be possibly 27. I don't know. I don't think they're going to be a great big hero. I think they're going to be very unassuming. I really don't know what they look like. I'm hoping they look incredibly different than what we've been seeing so far. I'm happy to take nominations. Where's value created? I've sort of talked about this, but you can look through this. Return on capital here, the speed of knowledge transmission, the ability to generate new ideas and creativity and imagination. Now look who's the most important person to the CEO. I call them the chief talent officer because I'm trying to get away from HR a little bit. I don't mind. Human resources is fine. It just connotes industrial age to me. If you want to call it human resources, they are human and they are resources. It just sounds machine-like to me. So, but they are the most important person if you want to put some hierarchy on it. If you have to put hierarchy, you don't have to put hierarchy, but they are the most important because talent is the most important person, the most important resource and the most appreciating exponentially capital, if you want to call it a machine term, in the company. And the most differentiating capital that you've got is talent. Everything else is a commodity. So you better have that person picked, hand-picked, and you better pay that person hand-picked, and that person better know, and I'll talk a little bit about who that person is. And then You can see some of the enterprise systems. And the systems that we better have to focus on the internal employee. They are critical to this. We've forgotten about them the whole time. 1980s, 1990s, 2000, 2010. Now, we've got to focus on the employee at long last. So, Talent Wins came out this year. Ram Charan, one of our favorites, leadership pipeline author. And the boys had to write this, of course. Unfortunately, the boys had to write it. I would have liked to write this book. You know when you read a book and you're like, whatever, I've written this stuff over and over and over myself, but the boys had to write it. So Ram Charan, Dominic Barton, Dennis Carey. So Dominic Barton's the head of McKinsey, Dennis Carey's the head of Korn Ferry, and Ram Charan wrote Leadership Pipeline, So you're like, okay, finally. The boys wrote it, Talent Wins, and if you read it, you're like, oh, okay, at last. Talent has never been more important to the success of a corporation. Talent is queen. The queen is the most important piece on the chessboard, but they said it's king. Talent, even more than strategy, is what creates value. The implications of this are profound. Now, all throughout that book, they basically are arguing what I've argued for years. But they brought the book out this year, so that's okay. And it's not catching on like wildfire in Australia. I've given it to every CEO and director I've met. We'll see how we go. But at least Dominic's out there and he's plugging the cause, and I appreciate that. And we'll get there one of these days. There are some CEOs. The CEO I had at Cochlear that I partnered with, Chris Smith, was phenomenal with this, and we really got it. We turned around our executive team completely in the first 4 months we were around, and it was all about talent, and he knew it. And that's what we did. I've got Jenny from Cochlear and Tamara that was here, and we really got it, and that's what we drove. And we drove talent is strategy, and we really understood that. And we built a strategy pretty much around how do we attract the best talent that we possibly can get our hands on. And so that was critical. That's what they argue in this book. So if you don't have talent inside your organization who are constantly watching the customer and competitor and technology trends, then they don't have the wherewithal to constantly address the shifting needs of the customer. And you guys know this. And then if you don't teach these guys what ifs, how cans, if we could, then they don't know how to create a future that is, how do you adjust this future for world technologically, health-wise, and environmentally wise? And so our talent is constantly trying to figure out, how do I expand this talent once I get them in? How do they think? What do I do with this talent now that I've got them? And, all these psychometrics in the world are fine, but I'm more interested in, it just reminds me of the time I was outside of CBA and I was asked to figure out how to assess who would be Ralph's replacement. And I was trying to think, okay, what's a question I can ask these guys that can sort of discern talent? So I said, okay, all right, how do you think CBA has done since, it was a year since Lehman Brothers collapsed, and so I just asked a question, how do you think CBA's done over the years since Lehman Brothers collapsed, and how do you think they're going to fare in the next couple of years? This is just a simple question. Then I watched how they answered the question, and it was amazing, because all of these guys have an enormous amount of IQ. In fact, one CEO asked me of another bank, which shall be unnamed, he said, Catherine, I think we should just test all of our top 50 for the IQ. And I said, no, we're not going to test them all because they'll all be over 150, guaranteed. It doesn't matter. It's not the IQ I'm looking for. It's their ability to think creatively and out of the box is what's going to get you out of trouble in the imagination age. Because I guarantee, when I've listened to the answers coming back to the question I asked them about how CBA is going to fare, there was only one or two people that could actually start looking at not only how CBA is going to, how their little business unit was going to fare, but they could also ask how all of CBA and its 175 business units, how it could do, but also how the whole financial services system could respond, but also how all of the financial services in Asia Pacific could respond, and also how the entire world financial services could respond, and also for the next 5 years, how the world financial services could respond, and CBA's role within the financial services could respond in many different scenarios. That's pretty good. That was Ian Narev. So, that teaches a lot, and you can teach people how to do that type of thinking. And you can provide scenarios. And I think one of the greatest things a talent person can do is be a type of stage producer in which you give your people a chance to do that type of thinking and to provoke that type of thinking. A teacher, a producer, a choreographer. I think that's one of our biggest roles, choreographing. So you can see some of these other things, and I won't go through all of that, but we have a big role. We are producers, we are directors, we are teachers, we are all kinds of things. But our basic job is to find the talent, to nourish the talent, and to grow that talent, and it's never been such a big job as it is today. It's critical. And it's also a great deal of fun. So this little... You won't see the detail to this, but that's okay. You can see the colors. And that's what I was trying to indicate by the IQ. What I'm phenomenally interested in is there is a way, and it's been with us since we were ancient people, and I study a lot of ancient philosophy and ancient wisdom from all kinds of sources, and I always have. I've always been fascinated because we've always been interested in what is wisdom, right? So this is kind of like a chart of wisdom. And potential. And basically what I'm going to try to indicate to you is it's not IQ, but there is measures now. And those of you who recognize names like Robert Keegan, who's kind of popular in our HR world, he's there. Suzanne Cook-Reuter is also well known. She's there, right there. But there are ways to actually understand how people think creatively. It's not easy. You can't throw them behind a computer necessarily and tell them to take a multiple choice test in IQ. But there are ways to assess how people think creatively, and you can see it, and you can develop it. And that's really important for us. And I would suggest to you that most businesses and business people are sort of around here. And that's okay, because we're okay. We're about we're sort of conformist, we're sort of self-protective around here. And once in a while, you can get some leaders that are around here. They're around here. And when you get the leader that is just phenomenal and transformative, and you just, life-changing here, and when you get Gandhi, you're here. And it's society changing, or Nelson Mandela is about around here. Very rare, very rare. So you can develop people, and that's what I'm phenomenally interested in. And so I study constantly, but it has to do with the mind and the mind fitness, and that's why we're phenomenally interested in the brain. When we say brain, we actually say we're interested in the mind. So that's where the development will come. And in the next part of our society, we'll be interested in what we've always known, which is actually going back to our ancient wisdom. We're phenomenal forgetters. Phenomenal. You know what? We're so good at forgetting. This theory has been around since 1960. And I think it's quite funny. I just brought it out just to remind us that we've actually known this stuff all along. I kind of giggle when people say, "Oh no, I can't give my intellectual property away." I was like, "I'll give anything away because this stuff's been around for ages. This is 1960." Okay, so we know this, right? We've always known this. So if I'm always giving stuff away because there's nothing I can do that is anything new. And I study a lot of Vedic scriptures, and I study a lot of Buddhist stuff, and I'm like, every time I pick that stuff up, I'm like, oh my God, it's been here. I put this up because this is 1960. So this is kind of, a lot of people are starting to think, okay, so if the imagination age needs a bunch of different things, then how are we going to start organizing our structures? Because obviously hierarchical structures don't work. There is a lot of good thinking now that's going on, and we don't have the answer, which I think is kind of cool. We just don't have the answer. So Holacracy is one way, and I'm not going to go into the detail of that. Flatarchy is another. Flat organizations. There's some really interesting words. The traditional model just doesn't seem to work, where bosses are at the top, and the top-down command and control always works, and the market, that works. We kind of know that anyway. There's some amazing tools out there that are starting to, you can actually use to chart organizations, and they can see that that's not how organizations work. And we kind of know that. I think it's really, really important to start forming organizations where you've got the most number of people feeding from the customer and getting customer intelligence all the time. And so how do you form your organization to get the most intelligence to the center as much as possible? The U.S. Army started to figure this out long ago. And ironically, the U.S. Army is one of the least hierarchical in many ways, not always, in many ways than in any other organization, where they are really feeding information out from the field back into the center. And they figured it out a long time ago, the devolved leadership model. This guy is, forgot what his author is. Frederick Laloux wrote Reinventing Organizations. That is a really good book if you want to get a sense of how the world is starting to grapple with the imagination age. Laloux. This is a chart from his book. So he's starting to use the little structure that I put up for you, and he's applying it to structures in organizations. And he's basically saying, okay, if we started off foraging bands, and we started going authority by the elders, powerful chieftains, hierarchies, command and control in that industrial age. He's saying, okay, then we went to matrix. And then he said, okay, relations above outcomes, stakeholders' perspective. And he says there are some companies that have gotten too nice. And they're just kind of too wishy-washy. He reckons the green's not that clever. But he has researched in his book, and it's well worth reading, Self-Management for Evolutionary Purpose. And he's researched several organizations that are well worth looking at because they're just on the edge. They're just emerging. And they're just so new to us, where they're completely, as you saw, a center, and then they're completely radioed out. And there's not really a hierarchy. Sure, there's a CEO that's there to report, but he's not like fundamentally ordering instructions down. He's there to collect information. I think that's where the moves will start to happen. But it's very, very interesting, and I think this is what we will start to see. Our younger people are going to demand it. And this is the fast-moving decision-making. These are the creativity. This is what we will start to want to see, in my feeling. And I'm going to pause, and I'm going to get people to just, in fact, talk to your neighbor just for 2 seconds, just to give yourself a mental break from my haranguing, and I'll grab some comments.
I'm just intrigued as to how we help create the conditions that will allow more organizational groups to start to self-manage and find purpose, whilst we're overlaying conditions on them that are going to make it almost harder.
Yeah. I think the Royal Commission was a huge diversion and distraction. I think we're going to be in trouble because, I mean, unless the banks figure out how to respond. I know one of the guys that's in charge of responding to in CBA quite well, and I've been talking to him a little bit about it. And we know the banks are in for a massive disruption, and other companies are going to come and steal everything right underneath the bank's nose. We're watching it, and while the banks are getting all that regulation, they're going to be their lunch will be taken right from underneath them by those companies that are not regulated. So I'm kind of concerned about that. So they're going to have to be incredibly clever about how to create these conditions and still comply to that regulation. And I'm worried for this country, and you'll see why, that was a complete and utter distraction in many ways. And so the question for all of us is, how do we have the ethics? And if you read his book, in many ways, the self-management created the ethics because we actually started trusting people to do the right thing instead of putting so many regulations on it. The people, because we actually started, there was an example in the book where there's a huge, stationary, even a hardware cupboard, and they used to put all these padlocks on, and you had to put all these combinations to get in. And then all of a sudden they decided, no, let's just leave it open. And you just take what you need. You don't even sign up for what you take anymore. You just take what you need when you need it. And they figured they actually lost way more under the lock and padlock situation than they did when it's take what you need, don't even sign what you need. So when everybody started trusting, you just use what you need for business purposes, and everything was open, and everybody trusted each other, then it was like so much more, less wastage, less stealing, less everything. And people started going, oh, I'm trusted. Oh, okay. I think I'll act according to that. So it's interesting. I don't know. I'm worried. And he is too, by the way. The regulations are causing more odd behavior because we're wanting to push against it. So I don't know. It's a very worrisome topic. Yeah. Okay, so what are we seeing? Self-organizing teams. Sometimes we're seeing coaches. So where are we going? Those of you who are HR people in the crowd, where are we going? We're becoming more coaches rather than administrators. Coordination through fixed meetings at every level. So we know we're in a society with meetings. Teal practices, he calls it teal because of the colors associated with the level of evolution. So not really executive team meetings, but there are coordination meetings, mostly ad hoc when the needs arise. So you don't have a Monday morning meeting every week. You just have a meeting when you need to solve issues. Very radically simplified project management, minimal plans and budgets, organic prioritization. You don't see a lot of these central staff planning in these new organizations. Most of the functions are performed by the teams themselves. No real central headquarters. That starts breaking down. So, HR personnel really starts to go away. The interviews are done by future colleagues. We were talking earlier before the meeting, significant training in relationship skills. Company culture becomes very important. Personal freedom and responsibility is very important. It's critical importance of common training that everyone attends. Culture becomes incredibly important because it becomes the glues to everybody flies by the same beat. There's no job titles. My name is Catherine McLennan. I work for this company. That's what I do. It's very fluid. And we are looking for individuals that want to work for this company. Go imagine. Now, you have to really, really understand this. Really, it's different. This is what I do for this company, and it's going to be constantly changing. So I love this. This is my favorite. I've been rabbiting on about this. Anybody that knows me, I've been rabbiting on about time for ages. Most people, unless you're customer facing or a couple of other jobs, time is just becoming more and more or less and less relevant. Like, I don't know, like, tell me I have to write a book in 40 hours a week for 52 weeks. Time is just, and I just had to do, right before I joined Ethic, where I work now, I had to do a future of law piece for one of the legal firms. And even they're breaking down this concept. And I was like, yay! I know that accounting and law and, we're still sort of tied by the hour, but time is getting more and more or less and less relevant. We have to get away from full-time and part-time. It's killing us. It's killing us. It's absolutely killing us. In this imagination age, full-time and part-time have no meaning. No meaning. Don't go and tell me you want to work, especially if you're a woman just coming back from labor. Do not tell me that you want to come and work part-time. I want to pay you full-time. I'm going to pay you full-time even if you, whatever. This just gets me. Performance management's based on team performance. And then, look at this, peer-based process for individual appraisals. Self-set salaries? Oh my God. Law. Actually, they got really good results out of that. No promotions, fluid arrangement of roles based on expansion. And then there's some interesting conflict resolution. So really interesting, different stuff. Okay, so right hand of the CEO, the chief talent officer, you can name it whatever you name. I don't care. I don't really care about the name so much. I just wanted to name it something else. I just think talent's really important and everybody has it. It's not the high potential talent. It's everybody has the talent. What do you do with it? Here's all the different things. I think the consigliere is, I talk to my CEO probably 10 times a day, but maybe you don't have to talk to your CEO. I just think you're constantly, choreography is a big deal. You are putting on a show for your company. You have the time of your people. That time is so important. I did say one thing about time, but you do have 365 days, and you need to figure out how to use that time the most efficiently and beautifully. So what do you do with that time? Every meeting that you have in the company should be beautifully orchestrated, and the thinking between the people should be beautifully orchestrated. If I'm in a meeting that is boring, that's my fault. That's what I figure anyway. So if it's an inefficient meeting, that's my fault. Like, I take really responsibility for making sure that meetings come out with something incredibly new that's never been thought before. That's a big responsibility. I'm responsible for making sure the person that enters my company leaves incredibly wiser than they've ever been before, that they've come across new experiences that they've never felt before. They may fail, but they will have learned from that failure. I am a psychotherapist by training, but you don't have to be. But I'm really curious about, if that person's experiencing, like most of us, severe anxiety or depression or some form of obstruction to their thinking from this part of their brain. I need to help them. And I need to make sure that they're in their best well-being. And so how do I do that? I'm really curious about that. Me and the CEO is going to spend enormous amounts of time looking out for this. And we're going to be looking out a few years. The CEO is going to come with me all the time. He or she is going to spend a lot of time on that. And the boys agree with me on this, of Talent Wins. I am commercial, and I'm going to do some really good money and expenditure, and I'm going to tell you what the ROI on the talent I invest in all kinds of ways, and I'm going to have phenomenal systems that capture that, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go head-to-head with the CFO all the time on what the return of my investment is. And that is going to be incredibly important to me. And I'm going to sit at the table and I'm going to drive market based on the capability that I have. And a lot of times the capability that we have or we can get access to will drive our market decisions. And I'll be the most important person because I can tell you which markets we can go into and which markets we can't go into. And that's a really critical and important. So there you go. That's that. the last thing I wanted to talk about, and then I'm going to open it, so start thinking about questions, because I'm going to open it to the floor. I actually think that would be interesting in itself. And we would be actually in an interesting imagination age. But we are actually even in a more interesting crisis. And I'm pretty passionate about this particular topic right now because all around the world we're facing something even more interesting, perhaps, and Australia particularly. So my friend Andrew Charlton, another one that you should read. So Andrew Charlton wrote The Automation Advantage last year. And in that article, he works for a company called Alpha Beta. And in that article, he posited that Australia, by 2030, could add $2.2 trillion to its GDP. But, he said, if. Two major things. He said, if we could get our acceleration up to the standards that this map represents the rest of the world's level of automation. It's the US, but it actually represents the rest of the world automation. 50% of fewer Australian firms are engaged in automation compared to leading countries. So if we can get the standard of our automation practices up to the rest of the world's automation, so that's one big if. And if we can transition the workforce that's coming out of the NAB and the Telstra and the ANZ and the CBA and the Westpac and all of the other companies that are just about ready to let loose their jobs, then we can actually, and put them into the new businesses that we are meant to be building, then we can have $2.2 trillion. He reckons the machines will unburden the average Australian of 2 hours of the most tedious and manual work over the next 15 years. We'll have safer works, we'll have more satisfying works, we'll have more valuable work. So I go, Andrew, and he was Rudd's economist. He was the architect of the 2008 plan. Very bright boy. So I said, Andrew, I said, that's great. Now, I said, who's putting the plan together for moving all these people? And he said, Catherine, that's a really good question. I said, no one, is it? I said, okay. Because Telstra, as you know, is slashing 8,000 jobs. NAB slashing 6,000 jobs. New research predicts a third of Australian jobs will be lost to automation. Banks cut 40,000 jobs, and it's way more than that. And I don't know, hands up for the number of jobs that your company, anybody cutting jobs? No one. No one yet. Wow, okay, a little bit. Okay, starting. Companies are going to be starting to cut jobs in a massive way. Citigroup cut 20,000 over the next 5 years. I think this is a major issue. This is McKinsey's also another report that you might want to pick up. It was in December of 2017. It's called Jobs Lost, Gained. They reckon 75 million to 375 million around the world will be transitioning to new jobs. So there is a landslide that's going to be occurring. I just don't think we've felt it yet. And I think we're about to feel it over the next couple of years. I just don't think we felt the pain. And I'm like, okay, it's happening. If you've talked to anybody at Telstra, if you've talked to anybody at NAB, if you've talked to anybody at ANZ, they're shelving. I just did a back of the envelope. If I said 15% of, and I just took the top 20 ASX, I thought, okay, because definitely all those guys have done at least 15%. I got 135,000. Usually looking for full-time is 494. You know, that adds up quite a bit, back of the envelope. And it's going to be more than that. So what are the new skills being required for the new economy? This is what the World Economic Forum says. That's interesting. Okay, anybody see anything they can't do? Persistence, grit. I like that one. Curiosity, initiative, adaptability, leadership. These are things that robots can't do yet. I'm hoping they can't do yet. Critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration. These are things that our students need to learn in a different way. We were talking about that before. And we're starting to learn how to do education differently a little bit as well. So I'm kind of interested in that. And we're developing new pathways. One of the things I really like what Deakin does, and what the U.S. is starting to move on, you'll see this is Skillful. So Microsoft backed Skillful. The U.S. is moving on this big time. The U.S. has had a huge gap, and they've moved way before us. They didn't get protected like we did in the 2008. So they've already moved. They've had a huge cataclysmic gap, particularly in technology. So they can't afford to send, a lot of them can't afford to send their kids to four-year university degrees, and B, many of their technology gaps, they just can't afford to wait for 4 years. So what they're doing is just funding micro-credentials, and as you can see here, Microsoft has just, and by that means Google also and many other companies are investing millions and millions of dollars to fund credentials. This particular one is called skillful.com, and I've got a paper that explains many more, but they're just bypassing universities altogether. My paper actually refers to an article called Dismissed by Degrees, and the U.S. is just going, well, you know what? We don't have time for degrees, and in fact, the degrees are not helping us. So we are just going to do alternatives. And we're going to get jobs out there, and we're going to get employers to find the skilled talent they need to grow. And so the employers and the talent and the skills are going to get together, and we're going to make paths so we can get those guys together. I love what Deakin's doing, and I'm not just here because they're sponsoring me. I've actually been doing this lecture quite a few times, and I've featured Deakin because I think Deakin's the only one in Australia that's doing this. And I love it because so many of my friends haven't gone to university, and yet they have such rich experiences. And so if they have a rich experience in design thinking, they can contact Deakin and write essays and do some interviews, and they can get recognized for their design thinking with a micro-credential. And I think that's fantastic. And I think that's such an interesting way to get accredited, and I think that's phenomenal for Deakin to take the lead in that. And that's what the U.S. is doing, and that's what several universities around the world are doing, and Deakin is the only one in Australia that's recognizing that, and I think that's fabulous. So well done, because those are the kinds of lateral thinking that our universities need to do. I'm on the UTS Business School Board, and I've been kicking them not to do so much the micro-credentials, but I've been kicking them to create a transition center with the banks, and to start moving, because I'm really, really concerned about the reskilling of our people in Australia. I think we're going to be in trouble. And here's what I'm talking about. So in Andrew's paper, he's talking about high-risk workers between now and 2030. He puts the number at 3.5 million. I'm like, whoa. So I don't know how he gets to 3.5. That's a lot. The future workers coming into the market alone are 6.2. The kids, these are us, 9. So I'm thinking, okay, I just think we need some kind of physical transition meeting place, where the university takes online trainers, credential providers, like we were talking about. I think we are lousy at capital providers. That's why I've gone in to work for a trade capital, because I don't think we do very well at trade either. This thing called the government, future workers, schools, low-risk workers, we need to get together as a country and start figuring out how we're going to build the new economy. And this is my biggest concern. So I'm kind of starting to rally the forces. We're such a small country. We should be able to do this. Other countries are doing this. Canada's leading by a lot. Well, China wins on this. Now, they have an advantage because they sort of have one-party rules. But Canada is an amazing case study for us. And Canada is really amazing. They are just blasting. And and I'm learning a lot from just watching what Canada does. But we are not. We are just being left behind at miles and miles and miles a minute. And I'm just quite passionate that we start looking at what we need to do in this situation. I think we're going to be hit by a landslide. And I'll leave with this. I'm just about to finish. And this one is inspiring for me. I came across these guys. It's called transitionhub.com. And they're well worth looking at. They're a company called HPC Global. They did the work so they've collaborated with WeWork, so at least they're starting to move. They're a good example of a solution coming. So that's one example that's starting to emerge, but we need a lot more. We need a lot more examples of what we're going to do to take all these people and start moving them into the new economy. We need a lot more examples of how we're actually going to provide capital to the new economy that's starting to emerge. And that's just, as you can see, I'm on the soapbox. I've written 2 articles that are on my LinkedIn and available. One was about the first part of the lecture, and it has all my references and stuff that you can easily hyperlink to whatever you like. And then this one is about the second part, so very easy to access. Now, questions, comments, and very happy to take. Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess my question and my thoughts were in the imagination age was, how do we start that thinking process really, really early? Because it's not there. We're now trying to transform businesses. And instead of trying to transform businesses, we should be getting children to think critically very, very early and think that imagination thing. So,
just a word, and then I'm actually going to put Gavin. There are a lot of things that are going on in the school movement right now that I'm really happy about. I was just down in Geelong Grammar School. For the last 10 years, Geelong has been running with a positive education movement with Marty Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology. And that is one example, and the positive education psychology movement is starting to make some inroads of doing education very differently. I was just talking to Gavin, so I'm going to put him on. I mean, there's some movement, but boy, oh boy, they've got a long road ahead. So, yeah.
Yeah, firstly, I'll declare my interest. I got 4 kids, right? So that's... So, and they're from 11 to 18. So I work for Canon, and so not part of the HR. I run the business division at Canon, and we just commissioned a piece of primary research with a number of academics and school principals and stuff around Australia on the future of education. And so I was really interested about the future of work, because I agree it starts really early. There's probably one really progressive principal in Templestowe called Peter Hutton, who they have a year 7 to 12 program, and there's no set curriculum. The kids choose their own curriculum, their own work, and it's all about starting a business early and creativity. And so it's progressive parents putting their kids in this stuff in the school, and it really teaches them life skills going forward. And there's a lot of research coming out, and one of the very senior academics says, for the first time in my career, I don't know what to teach kids, because everything I teach them today might be irrelevant for when they start work. So it's a really interesting piece of research, which I'll get out through Leanne and the team to everyone here. And I think there's an event next week, so you're welcome to come if you just register. But it's something that we're thinking about. And why is Canon doing it? Because we've got 180,000 employees worldwide. And I was just saying to Catherine earlier on, even in my business, we moved people from Australia to Manila as a labour arbitrage, right? But right now, that, let's say, went from $80,000 employee to a $30,000 employee. Right now, we're going to implement robots in the next 4 weeks that will take that $30,000 employee down to $8,000. And that's to replace 8 employees for $8,000. So it's just phenomenal what automation is going to do. Well, the labour... So actually the bigger issue is those low-cost economies will never get the work in the first place. It'll just bypass that.
So sorry, a secondary question for you.
It's actually, when I say teachable, it's actually, it almost goes back to that school example. It's the opportunities of providing the space. it's creating a space to allow people to learn by creating the events. So, because everybody learns creativity and things their own way, in my experience. So it's really being phenomenally curious about that person and how they learn, and giving them the opportunity to do that in their own way, and letting them find out about how they do it. Because if you think about how do you learn curiosity, and how most of it is done by trial and error. And you have to have the space to do the trial and error, and you have to have the space to fail, and you have to have the space to move around and do different things. And you definitely have to have the space to bump into people, and you have to have the space to question, and you have to have the space to not know, and to run into things that you never thought you would run into. And if you think about how you learn and how you've learned in life, we, as choreographers, have to create those conditions. And that means getting out of the building. It means sending our people to weird and different places. Definitely knowing the customers, difficult customers. It means customers that they've never met before, never thought about. Different industries they've never seen. Different functions they've never come across, different countries and languages and diversity they've never been. It's how do you change, their frame? You're talking to a military brat that moved every 18 months of her life. My brain has constantly been pummeled, which had its good and its bad, but I knew how to create curiosity. So everybody learns in a different way, and you have to be incredibly curious about your people so you understand how they best learn. And that takes enormous amounts of energy, but it's required for this position. There's no one set curriculum for everybody. Everybody has their own curriculum, and you guys know that. So there's not a mass leadership development curriculum, and we all know, no sheep dipping. And you can't be done. Now, in Talent Wins, the book, they say you can only do it for 2% of your population. Maybe that's true, but I'd like to be able to think that, good leaders can do it for each of their people, and their leaders can do it for each of their people. We just need to teach them how. Sometimes it's just, I always do end, when I get to the end of these things, if I could teach one thing, I'd be teaching people how to have an intense curiosity about their people, how to have that South African saying which says, I see you and your potential. They always say sawubona when you see somebody, and then the person responds back, says, Sikona, thank you, because you've seen me and my potential. I exist in the world today. Whoa. It's not like, g'day. Sorry. So yeah, but it's an art. It's a real art, and the companies that get this really get it. And all of a sudden, shareholders are interesting. The employees are everything. If that's what it's doing, if it's dragging the companies out of the industrial age into the imagination age, then that's a great thing. That's my hope. Doing it the hard way. Yeah. So that's what my friend at CBA is hoping will happen. That's his goal. So his goal is, well, maybe what will happen is we'll get to the other side, and we'll get into this new, and the structures that he's trying to create are for the imagination age, and still respecting, what has come out, and trying to follow the rules while still trying to redesign a whole structure that's going to be a lot simpler without all the wealth management businesses that they have now, just because they've shelved. So, yeah. How are we going? Time? Oh, good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Catherine, and I really appreciate your patience. I know we've gone over a few minutes.